Saraphene Aldane had learned early in life that the world did not care about quiet people. She had grown up on the eastern edge of the Ashwood Pack territory, in a small stone house near the river, where the wind came through the walls in winter and the floors were always cold. Her father had been a pack elder once, respected, honored, invited to feasts. Then he had spoken against the High Council on a matter of justice, and the pack had turned its back on him. He died 3 years later, not from any wound or sickness, but from the slow kind of grief that comes when a man loses the only life he ever knew. Saraphene buried him herself, in the soft earth under the old cedar tree, and she did not cry at the funeral, because there was no one there to cry with. She was 22 years old when the pack summit arrived. The summit happened once every decade, beneath the light of the full moon in the month of Silver. Every pack in the 5 territories sent its people to the sacred grounds at the center of the land, a wide valley surrounded by mountains, where an ancient stone hall had stood for 500 years. It was the only time the 5 packs gathered together under one roof. Disputes were settled there, alliances were made, and most importantly, the mate revelation ceremony was held, the sacred moment when the moon goddess revealed the destined partners of those she had chosen. Saraphene had not come to be chosen. She had come as an attendant to High Elder Marin's daughter, Vessa. Vessa was tall, elegant, and cold in the way that beautiful women sometimes are, when they know everyone is watching them. She wore silk the color of cream, and kept her dark hair pinned with silver needles. She had been prepared for the summit her entire life. Everyone, the council, the servants, the betting men in the lower halls, believed that the moon goddess would set her glow on Vessa, and then set Vessa beside the Alpha King. Saraphene did not believe or disbelieve. She simply carried Vessa's belongings, kept her head down, and stayed near the back walls. She had masked her scent the way her mother had taught her, river clay pressed lightly behind the ears and along the wrists. Her mother had said it was useful for staying out of other people's business. Saraphene had always thought it was the most valuable lesson she had ever received. The stone hall filled slowly on the night of the ceremony. Torches burned in iron brackets along the walls. The 5 alphas sat in carved chairs at the front of the room, with their generals and advisors standing behind them. The high elders occupied the gallery above, and at the center of the hall, on a raised platform of white stone, stood the altar of the moon goddess. King Calum Draveth entered last. He was not announced. He did not need to be. The room simply shifted when he walked in, the way a forest shifts when something large and powerful moves through it. The conversation stopped. The women straightened. Even the men who had met him before seemed to find a reason to look at the floor. He was tall, with black hair that fell just past his jaw, and eyes the color of silver in low light. He wore no crown, only a dark coat and the mark of the 5 packs branded on the inside of his left wrist. He was 30 years old and had been Alpha King since he was 18, and in 12 years, no one had ever seen him smile. He took his place at the center platform and waited. The High Priestess began the ceremony. She spoke the old words, the ones in a language older than any living pack member, and the candles in the hall rose taller, without anyone touching them. The air became heavy with something that was not quite sound and not quite light, but was somewhere between the two. And then the moon goddess answered. The light descended in a column from the high windows of the hall, silver white and slow, moving the way water moves when it has no hurry. Every eye followed it, every breath held. It did not land on Vessa. It found Saraphene in the far corner of the hall, half hidden behind a stone pillar, still holding a traveling bag she had forgotten to set down. The light touched the top of her head and spread across her shoulders like a warm hand, and the scar on her collarbone, the one she had carried since birth, the one she had never been able to explain, began to glow. The silence in the hall lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the hall erupted. Saraphene stood very still. She set the traveling bag down carefully against the wall. She looked at her hands, which were glowing faintly at the edges of her fingers, and she thought, with remarkable calm, that she had not expected this. High Elder Marin's face went completely white. Vessa turned toward her with an expression that was not anger exactly, but something colder than anger, the look of a person who has had something taken from them that they never actually owned. King Calum crossed the hall. He moved through the crowd the way fire moves through dry grass, without stopping, without hesitation. People stepped out of his way without knowing they had decided to. He stopped in front of Saraphene and looked at her. She looked back at him. He was close enough that she could see the silver rings in his eyes were not a trick of the torchlight. They were real. He studied her face the way a man studies a map of a place he does not want to go. Then he said, in a voice that was quiet but filled the room completely, "I reject you." The mate bond had barely formed. It had lasted perhaps 6 seconds, but the breaking of it felt like a door slamming on a finger, brief, sharp, and breathtaking in its pain. Saraphene felt it move through her chest and down into her stomach, and she understood, in that moment, what it meant to have something taken before you had even had the chance to hold it. She straightened her back. She looked directly into the Alpha King's silver eyes and said, clearly and without any trembling in her voice, "Then I accept your rejection, Alpha King." She did not cry. She did not look away. She simply accepted it the way she had accepted everything else in her life, with the quiet dignity of a person who has learned that falling apart is a luxury not everyone can afford. What she did not say was the thing that surprised her most. Somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the shock and the humiliation of being rejected in front of 500 people, there was a strange and aching sense of recognition, as if she had known him before, as if she had stood in front of this exact man in a dream she could not quite remember. She let the feeling go and turned to pick up the traveling bag. She never got the chance to use it. High Elder Marin moved quickly. Under the old pack law, laws that had not been used in more than a century, a woman touched by the moon goddess who was then rejected publicly could not simply return home. She was considered a spiritual disruption, a sign that the natural order had been disturbed. The council met in a closed room for 20 minutes. The sentence was delivered quietly, written on a folded piece of paper that a young boy brought to Saraphene's chamber door. She was to be executed at the following moonrise, at the stone ring on the eastern edge of the summit grounds. Saraphene read the paper twice. She folded it carefully. She sat down on the edge of the small bed in the attendance room and looked at the window for a long time. She did not run. There was nowhere to go. Her pack would not welcome back a woman who had embarrassed the High Elder. Running through the mountains alone would only mean dying in the cold instead of dying here, with stone beneath her feet. She had never been the kind of person to choose a harder death just to say she had chosen it herself. She spent her last evening at the sacred pool near the edge of the summit grounds, a still circle of water that reflected the moon even in daylight, as if it had its own sky inside it. A young serving girl found her there and pressed a warm bread roll into her hands, and could not meet her eyes. Saraphene thanked her anyway. She sat by the water and thought about her father, about her mother, who had died quietly and without complaint, the same way her mother's mother had before her. She wondered sometimes if there was something in her family, not a curse exactly, but a pattern, a tendency to be in the wrong place at the wrong moment, to be the person the world practiced its cruelties on. She traced the scar on her collarbone with one finger. She had always felt, in a way she could never explain, that it was not a wound, that it was something more like a door that had not yet been opened. The guards came for her at midnight. She stood, she walked with them. She did not look back at the stone hall as they led her away through the quiet grounds. In a high window of the hall, King Calum watched her go. His body was completely still. His face showed nothing, but somewhere inside his chest, the ancient creature that lived beneath his human skin, the great silver wolf he had carried since birth, had begun to make a sound he had not heard from it in 12 years. It was howling. The stone ring sat on a flat clearing surrounded by old pine trees. It was made of 12 standing stones, each one as tall as 2 men, each one carved with the symbols of the moon goddess. It was the oldest sacred place in the 5 territories. It was where the worst decisions of 5 centuries had been carried out in the goddess's name. Saraphene knelt in the center of the ring. The executioner raised the ceremonial blade. The moon went dark. Not covered. Not hidden. It simply stopped giving light, the way a candle stops when someone decides it should, as if the moon goddess had turned her face away from the world entirely because she could not bear to watch what was being done in her name. The clearing went black. Then the stone beneath Saraphene's knees began to glow. Not a soft glow, not gentle. It came up through the rock like something that had been waiting underground for a very long time, and when it broke the surface, it was bright enough to make every person in the stone ring cover their eyes. The scar on Saraphene's collarbone opened, not bleeding, but blooming, tracing the shape of a crescent moon in pure silver light across her skin. The voice that filled the clearing was not loud. It did not need to be loud. It simply was. The way the wind is, the way the tide is, something that was happening whether anyone wanted it to or not. You would execute the one I chose, the voice said, because a man was afraid of what I gave him? Then let every secret you have kept in my name be seen. The ceremonial blade in the executioner's hand became silver dust. High Elder Marin fell to his knees, and as he fell, something fell with him. The things he had kept hidden for 30 years came apart in the open air, like old cloth. Falsified records. Mate pairs he had separated by force. Vesa herself, who had never been destined for the Alpha King at all, whose true mate was a blacksmith named Orin in the Eastern Pack, a quiet man who had spent 3 years not understanding why he felt as though someone had been erased from the center of his life. The Council of Elders stood very still for a moment. Then, one by one, they lowered their heads. King Calum arrived at the stone ring at a full run. He was too late to stop anything. He came through the tree line just in time to see Saraphene rising from her knees, the silver light still moving across her skin, her gray eyes bright with something that was not quite anger, and not quite sorrow, but was entirely hers. And he felt the mate bond, the one he had broken with his own words, rebuild itself in his chest like a bone setting back into place. It hurt in the specific way that justice hurts when it arrives after a long absence. He dropped to one knee on the stone. The voice of the moon goddess returned, quieter now. Saraphene Aldane did not beg. She did not curse the man who broke her. She walked to her death with more dignity than any king in this ring has walked to his throne. She has earned what no ceremony can give, not by bloodline, not by marriage, not by the approval of a council, by the content of her own soul. The light settled into Saraphene and stayed. The crescent mark on her collarbone became permanent, silver beneath her skin, warm and steady. She was named True Luna of the 5 Packs, not the Luna of 1 Alpha, not a title that required a husband, a title that was entirely hers, granted directly by the goddess, answerable to no one but the moon. The wolves in the stone ring bowed, not because they were told to, because something old and true in their nature recognized what was standing in front of them. Calum did not bow. He was still on one knee, looking up at her with silver eyes that had, for the first time since he was a young boy, lost their coldness entirely. Saraphene looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked him, quietly, so that only he could hear, "If she had not come, would you have let them kill me?" He did not look away. He did not soften the answer. Yes. And now? He was silent for long enough that she could hear the wind moving through the pine trees at the edge of the clearing. "Now," he said, "I would take the place of every stone in this ring before I let anything touch you." It was not enough. She knew that, and the honesty in his eyes told her that he knew it too, but it was true. And truth, Saraphene had learned from a life built on very little else, was the only place anything real could ever begin. She did not take his hand that night. But she did not walk away either. She simply turned her face toward the moon, which had returned to the sky, full and steady and generous, and let the silver light fall on her shoulders like it had always meant to, like it had been waiting her whole life to find her.